Hello, and welcome to Bada Boom. I'm Troy. On today's episode, we welcome Keith Arem and Chris Yates of BCB Productions to talk about the Kickstarter for Frost Road. Writer and creator Keith is the performance director for several top grossing game titles, including Call of Duty Black Ops 1 and 2, and Call of Duty Modern Warfare 1, 2, and 3. He's also recorded and produced over 700 commercial releases, such as the Spider-Man series, Tony Hawk Pro Skater series, and Street Fighter 6, along with more. Keith brings all of this background and more into his new series, Frost Road. Chris Yates is a seasoned comic book expert who has worked with several influential names in the comic book industry, such as James Tynion, Rick Remender, Joshua Williamson, Frank Miller, Skybound, and Boom Studios. With his knowledge and experience, Chris is ready to bring the story of Frost Road to readers everywhere. Listen in as we dive into the creation and the world of Frost Road.
Hey, Keith and Chris, how are you guys?
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks,
Okay.
guys. It's great.
No. I'm really excited to talk to you guys about Frost Road and the Kickstarter. I think anytime a Kickstarter is launched, it's a really daunting task, even if there's a great story and great people behind it. So what's it been like sort of launching it, seeing the response? I know, again, there's like that nerves and the excitement, but what's it been like?
It's been amazing. It's been so great. The fan response has been phenomenal. And just in our first few days, not only the feedback, but the funding, everything's been right on track with what we were hoping for. And yeah, I think that, a lot of us, we come from larger properties and other things in the video game space and other books where you've had large marketing departments and big campaigns that you kind of go out there. And Kickstarter is just such an amazing community, and tapping into that community, even though we've been backing other projects and been involved in other ones. It's a learning process, and being out there on your own is a little daunting at the beginning, but the community has been just so supportive and fantastic.
Yeah, and working on like those bigger properties, what's it been like sort of like working on your own thing? I think there is something like there is a lot of fulfillment in working on those bigger IPs, and obviously it's like checking off like a lot of like bucket list items, but what's it been like sort of working on your own thing and seeing sort of like that come to fruition and building your own world?
Yeah, because when you work on $100 million video game or some large project, you just it's not that you take it for granted because you're always collaborating with really amazing people, but you just have an army of people to be able to address things, and you're one small part of that machine. And I think when you're doing your own project, you are that machine, and building that machine and your own team has been really an instrumental part of like growing your own IP. And so, the team I'm working with is Christopher Shy, who's the artist on the book, who I did Ascend with back with Image Comics when we did our first book together, and Brandon Humphreys, who I co-created the story with years ago, and we were working on Infex and a few other books that were very successful. And then bringing together Trevor Goring and RJ Cooper, who are doing storyboards and art fixes and other things that's there. And then as we brought the book together, I recently was able to connect with Chris Yates, who's joining us today. And Chris is now heading up our as a director of our special operations. And we're seeing Frost Road as sort of the beginning of sort of our own imprint and our own sort of label idea of taking all these PCB properties that we've been developing over the years and now using Kickstarter and some of our own sort of pipelines to be able to get that out to our audience that knows us mainly from our video game work and our other animation stuff.
Yeah, and what would you want people to like have as an introduction for Frost Road? Like we know a little bit from the Kickstarter that we've read, but for people that don't know anything about it, what would you want them to know about it to get interested in it?
The best part is it's actually finished, which is great. This was started off as a screenplay that I was doing for a horror film also called Frost Road. And the film before COVID had been in production, and we actually had some film offers. And between some a devastating fire that we had and what also happened with COVID and other things, Hollywood and other things have had other plans. And so we really spent the past several years finishing the book, getting it back together for print. And rather than just going out with a traditional book publisher, we really wanted to do this with the community. So the book is great because it's a psychological horror thriller. Every page is painted with Christopher Schei's work, which is just amazing. We brought in some great actors to help us as a photo reference. So we have Yuri Lowenthal from Helldivers and Prince of Persia, and obviously Spider-Man is his biggest role that everyone knows him for. And so we had people like Yuri and Chris Jai Alex from Extraction and from Transformers, and Edo Ross, who's an amazing actor who's been around for years from The Hidden and Full Metal Jacket. So we had these sort of iconic actors that kind of helped us get photo reference for Christopher as he was painting all the pages. And now we've got this beautiful 250-page book that's pretty dark and scary. I mean, it really is a psychological horror that deals with a guy that wakes up behind a wheel of a car and he's in the middle of this town, Frost Road, that has just ripped themselves apart. And he, for some reason, is immune. And a few of the survivors he finds are, but most of them are not. And so the book is kind of like we describe it as sort of like a zombie movie in reverse, because instead of being attacked by all these different mindless creatures, these are people that are literally, for some reason, whatever signal or whatever's happening in this town is causing them to sort of be a harm to themselves and anyone around them. So our main character is sort of taking these ticking time bombs and trying to get them out of Frost Road. And so it's a fun, contained story. It's all one graphic novel. It's not an ongoing series. But as our first entrance into not only the Kickstarter community, but also the idea that this is going to be made into a film and other things is very possible.
Yeah, and like what I really liked about it being finished is that some of the um backers got some really great like things that you guys got prepared in terms of like hardcovers, some amazing art and behind the scenes. So what can backers expect if they back Frost Road?
So what we're doing for the first backers, the first 200 people that back us, we're actually giving them a script excerpt from the motion picture. We're giving them one of a hand-numbered storyboard that Trevor Goring did, and a special print that Christopher Schei did with our cover work. And so that's kind of a thank you gift for the early backers that's there. And as the campaign goes, we have some amazing stretch goals. Not only, obviously, our goal is to fund the book, but we also recently have announced our partnership with Dead Meat. So James and Chelsea of Dead Meat, who are just fantastic people and been working in the horror space. We're working to develop an audio drama that's sort of inspired and based on the Frost Road world. And we're hoping that as our stretch goals get met, we're going to be announcing some really special episodic reveals and other things to give back to our community. And like we said, like the book is already finished, so we can also share a lot more production materials and behind the scenes. And for backers that really either are fans of the work or our other projects that we've worked on, or up and coming creators who also want to learn from us, for people like ourselves who have been in the industry for so long, we're also doing reward tiers for people to get involved in a behind the scenes Q&A or an artist portfolio review for artists that want to sort of learn and grow their portfolios, or people who want to get into the industry, whether it be graphic novels and comics or film or video games. We're doing mentorship classes and panels and live things at San Diego Comic-Con. So I think this is a very different kind of campaign in a sense that we're already doing the book. The book is finished, and this is more on the fulfillment and the shipping of this very high-end, beautiful coffee table painted book. But I think more so, it's sort of our entry into the Kickstarter community to say that we really do want to give back to the community. And even some of our stretch goals that we haven't announced yet are going to be finding other creators and donating some of our proceeds to actually fund other projects as well. So we really feel that the Kickstarter community has an ability to elevate all of us, and the idea that the ocean that rises kind of rises all ships, and that's the idea that if we collaborate and work with other creators, that we'll all be successful.
And it's cool
Yeah, I
that
think you're doing. Oh, no,
oh, sorry,
Chris.
sorry.
Oh, no, I think that's really great. And like as you're listing everything that is possible through pledging to the Kickstarter, it just sounds more and more like, yeah, hey, there's the book, but we're also just creating an entire community, and there's something there for everyone. If you're an artist and you want reviews, but the audio drama, like I'm a big audio guy and listen to a lot of things, so like that's going to be not only like the book, but also where I want to dive in and be like, hey, how do they do this? Like, who all is the audio uh actors, voice actors, and stuff that'll be a part of it. So it really sounds like you guys are bringing a lot of different aspects and elements so that there's something there for everyone when it comes to Frost Road.
It's a really small community. It's interesting is that, in voice acting and performance capture, where a lot of people know my work with Call of Duty and Titanfall and things like Street Fighter and other projects like Yakuza, that is actually a very, very small community of performers and actors and other people. And the same is in the comic book and the graphic novel community. There's actually a very small number of people that are creating. It seems huge when you see all the projects and all the labels and all the things in stores. But the reality is each industry is actually very, very tiny. And the fact that we sort of work within all of those industries makes us kind of interesting. The idea of cross media or transmedia, where you're actually using audio dramas and animation and film and video games and virtual reality and comic books all to tell these different stories, means that our discipline has to be across all of those different mediums, but that means we're also collaborating with some of the best people in each of those mediums. And as things are moving their way into YouTube and other forms of distribution, you're seeing other creators like Dead Meat and other musicians and streamers and influencers that are also contributing and doing things. So it's kind of a neat time, because I know that everyone's been very paranoid and there's been a lot of discussions about AI and how that's going to replace a lot of creatives and kind of change things. And while it is a very powerful tool system, the creative choices that creators and people that collaborate together is really never going to go away. And while it may reduce some of the opportunities or jobs for some people, I think it's actually going to elevate a lot of creators and put more onus to be different than just stuff that can be regurgitated through AI.
Yeah, and I think what you bring is those years of experience and also that network. I think, you spoke to, I'm sure all the people involved from Yuri, from Christopher Shy, everyone you've met along the way and you've been able to bring them along and sort of really be able to deliver this vision. And I'm excited to see sort of those different media types, especially when it comes to this story. Like as you teased the audio drama, do you ever see Frost Road being a video game? Because, just from the storyboards I saw, I was like, oh, this is like kind of like Silent Hill vibes. I got a little bit of that, a little bit of that. But do you ever see that being a video game?
1,000%. I mean, I worked on Silent Hill. I worked on Resident Evil. I worked on The Suffering. We just did a lot of the artist deals for all the query stuff that happened. So I think the horror space in games is really, really powerful. And most of the stuff I work on tends to be genre based anyway, not just horror, but thriller and sci-fi and other things. So for me, I think the idea of a Silent Hill, Quiet Place kind of Last of Us world around Frost is very interesting, especially because one of the main characters is not only the town of Frost Road, but also sound. And being a musician myself and my background in not only music but also engineering, that ends up being a big character and a big part of this book. And I won't give any spoilers away, but the science and behind everything that's actually happening in Frost is actually real. And I think that people are going to be very surprised when they start to sort of realize what's happening in the story, because you start to see the reality and the correlations of what's actually happening in real life. And so I was very fascinated about taking this idea of science and fiction and a lot of real world things that were happening with using sound as weapons and what was happening worldwide, and then bringing that to the town of Frost Road. So it humanizes some very scary things. And I always love that what if kind of story. So as a game, I think we could really explore that and do some really neat stuff, especially with sound and the characters and the environment of Frost.
Yeah, and with like all these different ways you can, or all the different mediums you're sharing the story, how difficult, or maybe it's not difficult at all, is it to keep the story consistent? Or are you excited to say, well, we can maybe do something a little bit different when we do the audiobook, or if it's a video game, there's new elements you can kind of explore?
I think when you're creating a story, you have to look at the medium that you're creating for, because just because you have a great story doesn't mean it plays out in a linear fashion or a non-linear fashion. In a video game, and Frost Road actually does play out very interestingly, because the opening scene is a guy who wakes up with amnesia behind this car wreck, and you've seen things like 28 Days Later and other projects that kind of have that, but that is also very conducive to telling like a video game, in a sense that you have to explore the world and discover things, and through the agency of the player, your control going around, you discover more of the characters and the world and the story. Whereas a movie is a little bit more linear, and you're watching that and you're telling people a certain way. Audio dramas can also be that way, where you're listening and you're kind of using your imagination to fill those things in. So for me, the way I like to tell stories is not to just to sort of tell the same story over and over and over again on different platforms. I think that's more of like maybe the tent pole way that studios had kind of envisioned a lot of properties, where the film is the tent pole and then you have all these ancillary properties. But I think what's happening right now, and what's great as a storyteller, is that you could tell the pre-story or the post-story or a side story or maybe a different perspective of the world. And that way, you've already seen the movie, which is probably going to be maybe the most produced, polished, linear form of that. So the game allows you to explore other elements, or the audio drama gets behind into more of the character development, or the comic book allows you to read at your own pace and kind of get into the visuals and the story, and really identify with the characters. So I think as storytellers, all these different platforms that are coming out and coming and going between, the Vision Pro or the Meta Quest, is a whole different way of telling a story than something on your mobile phone, or something that you're going to play in a traditional game, or even a movie or a streaming show. So I think it's a great time for storytellers to start to explore these different things, because sometimes your story might not resonate in the right medium. Like the film might not hit, but the comic book may. And there's a lot of examples like that in a lot of popular culture.
Yeah, and sometimes it's hard to break through with all sort of the things going on, all the different mediums, all the great like stories. And for you, Chris, like where you're working on outreach and special projects, what's that been like, sort of telling that story and making sure that the word gets out for, things like Frost Road, and also all the different projects that are coming down the line?
Yeah, it's been a real joy. I mean, one of the things about me and Keith is that we met in December, and when we met through a mutual friend, I quickly realized, I'm like, dude, you have this treasure trove of IP and things, like you only have the Exiled, you've had success. Like, why do you not have more out there? And it was just more the fact that, and again, I don't want to speak for Keith, but it was just like I don't have that person. And so being able to kind of just craft the story with him and the campaign to be like, hey, here is this project that works. I mean, not to spoil it in terms of like it needs to be told, and it's very exciting. And so to reach out to people and kind of let Keith say who he is and kind of share his stories, and getting to craft that dynamic has been really fun. And the funny thing is, when people reach out, they're like, "Oh, so how long did it take you to paint?" I'm like, "Oh, no, that's Christopher Shy." Like I joke with Keith, there's too many Chris's on the
Chris's on
project,
the project.
As you know, as a Chris, I know the plight of not being the
yes.
only Chris. So,
So, but yeah, it's been great. I mean, to see kind of just the response. I mean, just to kind of like show you behind the curtain, like when we were starting to do this, like we had like months to kind of prep and do this stuff, and then we're like, okay, we're going to dedicate February to our pre-campaign stuff, and then like Keith got double pneumonia, like, and so it kind of
Like you
just
do.
like yeah. And so, you can't plan for everything, but you try your best. And so, being able to reach out to people, through all the connections that I've made in the past year, and just kind of being close to people and being like, hey, I think I have a gentleman and a team and kind of this thing that's going to be really fun because, again, as Keith said, this is the first one. Like we're learning as we go. We're trying to see what works, what doesn't, because Keith has this resource of talent and knowledge that can be shared because, again, we're asking fans to help because of the printing and fulfillment. And, we don't want to like overburden people with shipping because shipping is insanely crazy right now, especially with tariffs and things like that. So, that's why we thought of like, hey, why don't we add digital rewards or kind of Q&As or master classes and seeing like what resonates, what doesn't. And people are like, oh, I really love this. This was really fruitful. And it's like, okay, cool. People like this, maybe we can retool that for the next one. And then, that next project may not be necessarily a psychological thriller, or it might be more of an adventure story, or like a hard horror with like a capital H. And it's like, okay, how do we craft that narrative? So it's very much like that, like marketing cap of like, how do we do it, and then how can we constantly improve to make it better for us, but also for the fans as we build this? Because, as you know and just said, it's hard to get attention. Everyone's busy. I mean, Daredevil just came out. Comics is weekly. Like it's just so hard to be constantly updated. I mean, you talk about Marvel Rivals all the time. Like just there, that's video games, TV. The Oscars just happened, so you're just always trying to be mindful of getting that attention. And when you do, you just tell people, hey, like we want to provide for you. And so it's exciting.
Yeah, those are all exciting. And like I said, it's crazy because, I talked a little bit before recording, like Keith, you've been a part of so many big things that have been a part of my life. And before this, didn't know your name. And it's crazy that you've obviously had a big part in all those things. And I think sort of like what Chris has done and hopefully what this campaign does is also shed light on that. Because I think there are so many different roles that go into the things we love. And it's great to sort of see you at the forefront and be able to tell your own story.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it's interesting when you're in the studio constantly and directing. Obviously the actors and the animation and the story and the interaction that you're doing. That's obviously the hero and the focus of everything that we're doing. So a lot of us who work in production who've been doing it for many years, sometimes we're not credited or people don't know, or we're listed differently on IMDb, and people are like, oh, you're in the sound department. I didn't know you directed that. And so I think that like what's kind of nice is that a lot of us don't really have a lot of ego about it. It's more so that like we just love birthing ideas. And what's a challenge is that you're constantly creating and creating and creating, not just for your clients, but for yourself. And then you look back on the years of work you're doing and you're like, oh my God, I've got books and movies and projects, and no one has seen them other than our team or everybody internally, because everyone's seen Street Fighter and Titanfall and Call of Duty. And so the actors and everybody else, I think they get to see it. And that's why I think we have so many people and such a great network of people supporting us, because behind the scenes, everyone sees what we're working on and they're like, when are you doing your stuff? Because that's on the next level of what we want to be able to do. And I think because we don't traditionally have the infrastructure that a lot of these bigger corporations have, that it's kind of the indie model. Even though we're not indie guys, we're actually working for all the big corporations. But this is our stuff. So Kickstarter was really kind of the next step for us, because it allowed us to get to our fans directly. And now it's more of like, I don't want to say education, but it's more like sharing what we do, and people starting to realize that like, oh, wow, these are the people that crafted the performances of all the things that, we loved over the years.
Yeah. And for you, all these years being in the industry and working across different mediums, what is some of the, like, I would say, like, what was your favorite moment or game like performance that you had worked on being in that room? I know for me as a Call of Duty fan, when Ghost died, I still remember like that. So that's a particular moment I remember, and I'm like, oh wow, like did you get to direct that? And also, like, what are some of your favorite moments over the years?
Yeah, those are all
Mhm.
great. I mean, that was a very impactful moment for all of us. And, when you lose characters and that kind of stuff, and I remember like having to talk to like Craig Fairbrass or Kevin McKidd that their characters were going to die. And like, it's tragic in some cases because like, you have such a great relationship with the actor and you're working for so many years in cases like this that suddenly you realize, oh, we're not going to keep working together because the character's dead. So that was difficult sometimes. And sometimes we don't know, like sometimes in game development, things are changing so fast that sometimes it comes up very late in the process. It's not like you go in at the beginning of the script knowing some of these things. And we've had interesting projects, across Call of Duty and things like No Russian and other things that have obviously impacted people. But at the same time, we've had amazing opportunities to work with actors, and there's games like Toonstruck and Earthworm Jim and Ridge Racer and Metal Arms and Thrill Kill. Some of these games that either people didn't know like the extent of what we were doing, but we had so much fun in the production of these things, and they became either classic games or infamous games or things that people heard about. But the behind the scenes was kind of the stuff that's really there. And we've had projects, we've been fortunate enough to work on so many of these big AAA games that we get to work with big celebrities and well-known actors and other creators. And each project is kind of a new adventure and a new story. And we've got great stories of working with all these big celebrities and stuff that you would never hear, in tabloid magazines or other things. It's just kind of fun stuff that it only happens in video games. So I think that's a big part of our culture and our history, and a lot of great stories for when we all go out with friends and get to share all this.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of background stuff that I think people don't realize like goes into the games, obviously the voice acting, the production, and it's really great that you guys are going to be able to share and also give back to the community through Kickstarter with the master classes, but they also get the best book that's probably on Kickstarter maybe at the moment, which is Frost Road, and you get to experience all that. And I know from talking to Chris, probably both the Chris's, there's going to be a lot of well, it's obviously a lot of detail in the book, but like the cover is going to look really nice, and it's 250 pages, so you can enjoy it and sit down and read it. And that's going to be available for everyone to get their hands on Kickstarter, which we'll have a link in the description below. But Chris, and Keith, we just want to say thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about your history and about the book, about Frost Road. And with that, bada boom.
Bada boom.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Bada Boom podcast. Keep the conversation going on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. Get in the comments on our YouTube channel and let us know what you'd like to hear next. And please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen.